The rain had been falling for 3 hours straight when Ray Calloway first saw the shape on the shoulder of the highway, and if you had told him that a single glance through a fogged windshield at 2 a.m. was about to change the rest of his life, he would have laughed the tired laugh of a man who had driven this same stretch of interstate 10,000 times and never once found a reason to stop. He was 51 years old, a long-haul trucker out of Amarillo with a bad knee and a good heart he mostly kept hidden, and he was 6 hours from home with a trailer full of appliances and a thermos of coffee gone cold in the cup holder. The wipers dragged across the glass in that slow, hypnotic rhythm that had lulled him halfway to sleep more nights than he cared to admit, and the headlights carved a narrow tunnel of silver through a wall of water so thick the world beyond it had simply ceased to exist. And then, in the wash of the high beams, low against the guardrail where the gravel met the weeds, something moved. It was not much. A trick of the light, he told himself. A soaked garbage bag caught on the metal, a deer already gone, but something in the way it moved, that small, desperate lift of a head against the storm, made his foot come off the accelerator before his mind had finished arguing, and the big rig groaned and shuddered as he eased it down onto the rumble strip and rolled to a stop 100 yards past whatever it was he thought he had seen. For a long moment he just sat there with the engine idling and the hazards ticking and the rain hammering the roof of the cab like 1,000 small fists, and he told himself the smartest thing, the only sensible thing, was to keep driving. He had a schedule. He had a bad knee. He was one man alone on a black highway in the middle of nowhere, and stopping for shadows was how good people ended up as cautionary tales. But he could not make his hand reach for the gear shift, because he had seen the head lift, and a garbage bag does not lift its head. So Ray Calloway did the thing he could not explain to himself, the thing he would spend weeks afterward trying to put into words for anyone who asked. He turned off the engine. He pulled his old canvas jacket over his head, pushed open the door into the roar of the storm, and stepped down into the rain to go back and see. The walk was longer than it should have been. The rain came sideways off the passing dark and stung his eyes, and the trucks that blew by in the far lane threw up curtains of spray that soaked him through in seconds, and his bad knee protested every step along the gravel. He kept his phone light aimed low, sweeping the weeds, half hoping he would find nothing at all so he could climb back into the warm cab and forget this whole foolish detour. And then the beam found it, and Ray stopped breathing. It was a dog. A big dog, or it had been once, some shepherd mix gone to skin and shadow, its fur matted flat and black with rain and mud so that at first he could barely tell where the animal ended and the wet earth began. It lay on its side against the base of the guardrail, with its ribs heaving in quick, shallow gasps, and one back leg was bent at an angle no living leg should bend, and there was blood, thinned pink by the rain, tracing a thread from somewhere along its flank down into the gravel. But it was the eyes that undid him, because as the light touched them, the dog did not flinch and did not snarl, and did not do any of the things a hurt and cornered animal had every right to do to a stranger looming out of the dark. It simply looked up at him, and in that look was something Ray had no other word for but recognition, as if the dog had been lying there in the storm for hours waiting for exactly this, for one person out of the thousands who had roared past to finally stop. And now that he had come, the animal's whole trembling body seemed to sag with a relief so total it looked almost like surrender. Ray dropped to his good knee in the mud without thinking about his clothes or the traffic or the fact that a dog in that much pain could take his hand off at the wrist. He did not reach for it. He knew that much. He just knelt there in the downpour and spoke to it low and steady, the way he used to talk to his daughter when she was small and sick and frightened in the dark. Easy now. Easy. I've got you. I'm not going anywhere. And the dog listened. Its ears, ragged and torn at one edge, turned toward his voice, and when at last he eased his hand forward, palm down, slow as a sunrise, the dog did not pull away. It pressed its cold, wet muzzle into his palm and let out a sound so soft and so broken that Ray felt his throat close around it. A small, exhausted whimper that was not fear and was not pain, but something closer to thank you. He would tell people later that he made the decision right then, that there was never really a decision at all. He shrugged out of his soaked canvas jacket and worked it as gently as he could beneath the dog's shattered body, and the animal cried out once, a sharp yelp that cut straight through the noise of the storm, and then went quiet and let him do it, trusting him. And Ray gathered all that ruined weight against his chest and stood up in the rain with his bad knee screaming and began the long walk back to the truck. It was the longest 100 yards of his life. The dog was heavier than it looked, heavy with rainwater and mud and the dead weight of an animal too spent to help him carry it, and every step sent a bolt of fire up his leg, and twice a passing rig nearly blew him off his feet with its weight. But he did not stop, and he did not set the dog down, not even to shift his grip, because he could feel that shallow heart beating against his own chest, quick and thready and fading, and he understood with a clarity that frightened him that if he set this dog down in the gravel, it would not get up again. So he talked to it the whole way. Stay with me now. Almost there. You didn't wait all night in that storm to quit on me now, did you? And somehow he got the door open, and somehow he got them both up into the cab, and he laid the dog across the passenger seat on a nest of clean shop rags and his spare flannel, and he cranked the heater to full and turned on the dome light, and finally, got his first real look at what he had carried out of the dark. It was worse than he had thought. The leg was clearly broken. There were older wounds under the fresh ones, half-healed scrapes, and a raw band of missing fur around the neck where a rope or a chain had once been, and every rib stood out sharp enough to count, and the pads of the paws were cracked and worn bloody, as if the animal had walked a very long way over a very hard road to end up dying on the shoulder of Interstate 40. This was not a pet that had slipped its yard an hour ago. This was a dog that had been surviving, alone and hunted and starving, for a long, long time. And yet when Ray reached over to check the pulse at its chest, the dog turned its head and, with what little strength it had left, licked the back of his hand once, a single warm swipe of a dry, cracked tongue, and Ray Calloway, a 51-year-old trucker who had not cried since his mother's funeral, put his face in his hands and wept in the cab of his truck on the side of the highway while the rain came down. He got on his phone. He found the nearest emergency vet, a 24-hour animal clinic 40 minutes, back the way he had come, and he did not hesitate, did not think about the schedule or the load or the hours he would lose. He simply turned that big rig around at the next crossover and drove those 40 minutes with one hand on the wheel and the other resting lightly on the dog's heaving side, talking the whole way, keeping it awake, keeping it with him, because he had a terrible feeling that if those eyes closed now, they would not open again. If you have ever met an animal that looked at you like it already knew you, like it had been waiting its whole hard life for you to show up, you already understand what happened in Ray's chest on that drive, and I would love for you to tell me about it down in the comments, because these are the stories that remind us what we are capable of. The vet clinic was a low cinder block building with a single light burning over the door, and a young woman in scrubs met him at the entrance with a gurney before he had even finished explaining, because he had called ahead sobbing and half shouting, and she had heard something in his voice that made her not ask questions. They took the dog back through swinging doors that closed in Ray's face, and he stood in that empty fluorescent waiting room, dripping rainwater onto the linoleum in his socks, having left his soaked boots and his soaked jacket and most of his composure back in the truck, and he waited. He waited the way you wait for news about family. He paced the small room 100 times. He read every faded poster about heartworm and dental care twice. He called no one, because there was no one to call. Because the truth Ray did not like to look at directly was that the road had slowly become the only home he had, that his marriage had ended years ago and his daughter lived 3 states away and called on holidays, and that somewhere along all those endless miles he had become a man who was very good at being alone and had almost convinced himself he preferred it. And now, here he stood at 3 a.m, soaked to the bone, praying to a God he wasn't sure he believed in for the life of a dog he had known for less than an hour. When the vet finally came out, an older man with tired, kind eyes and blood on his sleeve, Ray could not read his face, and it terrified him. The doctor pulled off his gloves slowly. "She's alive," he said, and Ray felt his knees go. "She's a female, maybe 3 or 4 years old under all that damage, badly malnourished, dehydrated, that back leg's a clean break we can pin, and she's got an infection we're already fighting, but the thing that's going to save her or not isn't any of that." The doctor paused and chose his words. "The thing that's going to save her," he said, "is whether she wants to. Some of them, when they've been through what this one's been through, when they've been let down by people enough times, they just stop fighting. They let go. And I've seen the strongest bodies give up and the most broken ones hang on, and there's no science to it, son. There's only whether they've got a reason." And Ray Calloway, standing there in his socks, said the only true thing he could think of. "Then I'll be her reason," he said. So he stayed. He got a room at a motel 2 miles from the clinic, a place he had passed 100 times and never once stopped, and he called his dispatcher and did something he had never done in 26 years of driving. He called in and said he needed a few days. Family emergency. And when the man on the other end asked what kind of family emergency, Ray looked out the motel window toward the glow of the clinic and said, "The kind that matters." Every morning he was at the clinic when it opened. Every evening he was there until they made him leave. He sat on the floor of the recovery kennel with his back against the cinder block wall, and he read to her, actual news off his phone, box scores, whatever, just so she could hear his voice, and the staff started leaving him a folding chair and then stopped bothering because he never used it. And slowly, day by day, the dog came back. The IV came out. She lifted her head. She took water from his cupped hand, then broth, then on the 4th day, a few pieces of chicken that he fed her one at a time while she watched his face the entire time as if the food mattered less than the man giving it. The vet techs, who saw 100 sad cases a month and had learned to armour their hearts, began finding excuses to walk past the kennel where the big weathered trucker sat on the floor beside the sleeping shepherd. Somebody named her Rain for obvious reasons, and it stuck. And on the 6th day, when Ray came in that morning and crouched down at the kennel door, Rain did something she had not done. She stood up on 3 good legs, and the 4th in its cast, and she limped the 4 steps to the front of the kennel and pressed her whole body against the wire mesh to be as close to him as the door allowed, and she looked up at him with those same eyes from the storm. And Ray understood that whatever had happened out there on that highway, whatever thread of fate had made him lift his foot off the gas, it had run in both directions. He had not just saved her. Somewhere in those 6 days on the cold floor of a kennel, she had been quietly saving him too. He took her home. It was not simple. He drove 300 miles back to the little house outside Amarillo that he barely lived in, with Rain riding in the passenger seat on a proper bed now, watching the world go by through the windshield with her ears up, and he spent the next 2 weeks turning a bachelor's neglected house into a home for a dog. He fenced the yard. He learned to cook, a little, because the vet had put her on a careful diet to rebuild the weight. He rearranged his entire life, took local routes so he'd be home every night, took a cut in pay he could barely afford, because he could not stand the thought of leaving her, and she could not stand to be left, and the two of them, the broken trucker and the broken dog, slowly taught each other how to stop bracing for the next bad thing. She slept at the foot of his bed, and then at the side of it, and then, eventually, with her big head resting on his chest, and Ray Calloway, who had spent a decade believing he had run out of room in his heart, discovered there had been a whole wing of it standing empty the entire time, waiting. And that would have been the whole story, a good story, the kind that makes you glad, a man and a dog who found each other on the worst night of both their lives. But it is not the whole story. Because the story does not become the one I actually stopped everything to tell you until the part that came next. The part that Ray still cannot get through without his voice breaking. The thing Rain did about a month after he brought her home that answered a question he had never even known to ask. It was another rainy night. Not a storm like the first one, just a soft, steady autumn rain, and Ray had let Rain out into the fenced yard before bed the way he always did. But this time she did not come back when he called. He stood at the back door in his socks, calling her name into the dark, and she did not come, and his heart lurched with the old fear, and he grabbed a flashlight and went out into the wet grass to find her standing at the far corner of the fence with her nose pressed to the ground, and her whole body rigid, whining that same broken whimper from the highway, staring out past the fence into the field beyond. And when Ray came close and put his hand on her, he felt her trembling, not with cold, with something else. She looked up at him, and then back out into the dark field, and then up at him again, and she did the thing she had done that first night on the shoulder of the road. She took one limping step away from him toward the fence and looked back, waiting, and Ray understood that she was asking him to follow. If you are the kind of person who believes animals know things we don't, who has ever had a dog try to tell you something with everything it had, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button right now so this channel can keep finding these stories. Because what Rain led him to is the reason I could not let this one go. He opened the gate. He should not have. It was late, and it was dark, and it was raining, and there was nothing out in that field but mud and mesquite. But he opened the gate, and Rain went through it like something released, and Ray followed the bob of her pale cast through the wet grass with his flashlight, calling her, half running on his bad knee, out across the field toward the tree line at the bottom where a dry drainage culvert ran under the old farm road. And there, at the mouth of that concrete pipe, Rain stopped and lay down and began to dig and whine and press herself against the opening, and Ray dropped down beside her and aimed his light into the dark of the culvert. And his heart stopped for the second time in a month, because two small pairs of eyes shone back at him out of the black. Puppies, two of them, no more than a few weeks old, soaked and shivering in skin and bones, huddled together in the mud at the back of the pipe, too weak to do more than blink at the light. And in that instant, standing knee-deep in a flooded field in the rain, Ray Calloway understood everything. He understood why a starving dog had been walking that highway for so long that her paws had worn to blood. He understood why she had lain against that guardrail refusing to die, why she had looked up at him with that terrible waiting in her eyes, why she had fought her way back from the edge when the vet said, The only thing that could save her was a reason. She had a reason. She had left them here, hidden and safe in the only shelter she could find. And she had gone out into the world along that killing highway to look for food, for help, for anything. And she had been hit by a car and broken and left to die on the shoulder. And even then, even dying, the thing that had kept that heart beating was not her own life. It was theirs. She had been trying to get back to them the whole time. For a month, in a warm house with a soft bed and a man who loved her, she had carried this the entire time, waiting until her leg was strong enough, waiting for a night with rain in the air that smelled like the night she lost them. And then she had led him here, back across all those miles the only way she knew how, to the two small lives she had never for 1 second stopped fighting for. Ray got down on his belly in the mud and reached into that pipe and drew them out one at a time, 2 trembling scraps of life, and he tucked them inside his shirt against the warmth of his own chest exactly the way he had carried their mother out of the storm, and Rain pressed her face against his arm and licked the puppies and licked his hand, and made a sound he had never heard her make, a high keening cry that was grief and relief and joy all tangled together, and Ray Calloway knelt there in the rain in the middle of a dark field and wept for the 3rd time in a month. Wept until he could not see, one hand cradling 2 puppies and the other buried in the wet fur of the bravest creature he had ever known, and he understood at last what she had done next, why she had not simply lain down that night on the highway and let go the way any reasonable animal would have. She had refused to die because somebody was depending on her, and then, when she was safe and warm and finally strong enough, she had done the most extraordinary thing a rescued soul can do. She had turned around and gone back for the ones still out in the cold. He got all 3 of them home that night. He dried the puppies by the fire and warmed formula on the stove and fed them from a bottle while Rain lay curled around them, at peace for the first time since he had known her, her whole body finally unclenched. And the vet, when Ray brought all 3 of them in the next morning, the same tired, kind man with the blood on his sleeve, listened to the whole story with his glasses in his hand, and at the end of it, he did not say anything for a long moment, and then he said, "In 29 years I have never seen an animal do what that dog did." And Ray said, "I have. Doctor, I saw a man once who almost drove past her," and the vet had to turn away and busy himself with his charts. There is a part of this story Ray does not tell often, because it is the part that costs him the most to say out loud, and it is about his daughter. Her name is Emma, and she was 9 years old the last time Ray felt like a father instead of a voice on a phone, and the divorce and the road and his own quiet stubbornness had let the years between them stretch into a distance neither of them seemed to know how to cross. She was 26 now, married, living in Denver, and their calls had shrunk to a few dutiful minutes on birthdays and Christmas, the kind of careful, polite conversation you have with someone you used to love and no longer know how to reach. But Ray, in the weeks after he brought Rain and the puppies home, found himself doing something he had not done in years. He wanted to tell someone. He wanted to tell her. So one evening, sitting on his back step with Rain's head heavy on his knee and the 2 puppies tumbling in the grass, he did the thing that frightened him more than a broken dog in a storm ever had. He called his daughter, and when she answered with that guarded surprise in her voice, "Is everything okay?" "Dad," he said, "No, I mean yes. I have to tell you about a dog." And he told her. All of it. The storm, and the guardrail, and the eyes, and the culvert, and the 2 small pairs of eyes shining in the dark, his voice cracking in all the places it always cracks. And on the other end of the line, 3 states away, his daughter went very quiet, and then Ray heard something he had not heard from her since she was small. he heard her crying. Not sad crying. The other kind. And when she could speak, she said, "Dad, that's..." And she stopped. And then she said, "Why did you never call me like this before?" And Ray Calloway, who had spent a lifetime being very good at being alone, had no answer except the truth, which was that he had not known how, and that a half-dead dog on the side of a highway had somehow taught him. Emma drove down that next weekend, 9 hours, without being asked. And she sat on the floor of her father's living room with a puppy asleep in her lap and Rain's chin resting on her ankle. And she looked around at the fenced yard and the dog beds and the bottle warmer still on the kitchen counter, at this whole, tender, chaotic life her closed-off father had built almost overnight around a creature he had met by accident in the rain. And she said, quietly, "I didn't know you had this in you." And Ray said, "Neither did I, kid." And they sat together in the lamplight, not needing to say much more, because the dog had already said it for them. She comes down once a month now. She was there the day they took the cast off. She is the one who suggested keeping the puppy with the ragged ear, the one they named Storm, so that the mother would never have to wonder again where one of her babies had gone. And that, Ray will tell you, is the part people never expect, that a dog he pulled out of a ditch on the worst night of the year did not just give him back his own life, but gave him back his daughter too. That the ripples of one man lifting his foot off the gas ran farther than he could ever have imagined, into a phone call, into a 9-hour drive, into a family quietly stitching itself back together on the living room floor. The story got out, the way these things do. One of the vet techs had taken a photo that first week, Ray asleep, sitting up against the kennel wall with his hand through the bars resting on the sleeping dog. And she posted it with a few lines about the trucker who wouldn't leave. And it travelled the way the good ones do, and for a little while Ray Calloway was famous in the small way of the internet. Strangers from countries he'd never see sending messages, and he did not know what to do with any of it except to read them to Rain in the evenings. Which he did. But the message that stayed with him came from a woman 2 towns over who wrote that she had driven that same stretch of Interstate 40 that same night, in that same storm, and that she had seen the shape by the guardrail too, and that she had not stopped, and that she had been unable to sleep for weeks afterward wondering, and that she wanted him to know she would never drive past anything again as long as she lived. Ray wrote her back one line. "Neither will I," he said. Once, about 6 months later, on a clear, cool evening with nowhere he needed to be, Ray drove Rain out to the spot. He knew it exactly, mile marker and all, the way you know the place where your life turned. He pulled the truck onto the shoulder with the hazards ticking, and he let Rain out, and the two of them stood there in the long gold light with the traffic rushing past, at the base of the guardrail where he had found her dying in the mud, and Rain sniffed along the gravel and then lifted her head and looked out at the highway with her ears up and her tail moving slow. And Ray did not know what she remembered or how much, but he crouched down beside her with his hand in her fur, and he said, out loud, to the guardrail and the gravel and the passing trucks and whatever it is that arranges these things, "Thank you. Thank you for the head that lifted. Thank you that I was tired enough to almost miss it and awake enough not to." And then he loaded his dog back into the truck and drove her home. Because home was a thing they both had now, and neither one of them would ever have to sleep in a storm again. The puppies pulled through. Of course they did. They had their mother's stubbornness in them, that refusal to quit, and within a month they were fat and loud and terrorizing Ray's newly fenced yard. And he kept one, a little female with her mother's ragged ear, and he found the other the best home he could. A young family down the road with 2 children who had lost their own old dog the winter before, and who cried when Ray put that warm, wriggling puppy into their arms. He did not just hand the dog over and drive away, the way he might once have. He drove out to see them first, walked their yard, watched how the little ones were with animals, and he made them promise, only half joking, that he would be getting visitation rights, and he does. He takes Rain and Storm out there on Sunday afternoons sometimes, and the whole reunited litter tears around that yard, while the parents pour coffee, and Ray sits on the porch steps and marvels at it, at how one storm and one stubborn heartbeat spun out into all of this, into children laughing and a mother whole, and 3 healthy dogs that would every one of them have died in a culvert in the rain. He thinks about that a great deal, the arithmetic of it, how many lives balanced on one man being too stubborn or too tired or too something to keep driving, and how none of them, not the puppies, not the family down the road, not his own daughter on the living room floor, not Ray himself, would have any of this if he had listened to the sensible voice that told him a garbage bag does not lift its head. He kept the little female with the ragged ear for himself, and watching her grow up alongside her mother became one of the great, quiet joys of his life. The 2 of them so alike in the set of the years and the way they'd cock their heads, mother and daughter, the beginning of something where there had almost been an ending. And Rain grew strong and glossy and whole, the ribs disappeared under healthy weight, the limp faded to almost nothing, and the haunted waiting went out of her eyes for good, and was replaced by something Ray could only call contentment. The deep, settled peace of an animal who has finally learned that this time, this person, is not going to disappear. Ray never went back to Longhaul. He drives local now, home every night, and Rain rides shotgun on every route with her head out the window and her ears streaming. And the men at the depot who used to know him as a quiet loner, who kept to himself, now know him as the guy with the shepherd who waits by the gate every afternoon. And Ray Calloway, if you ask him, will tell you he did not rescue that dog at all. He will tell you he was a man who had quietly given up, a man running out the clock alone on an endless road, and that on the worst night of a stranger's life, he almost drove past the one thing that was going to save him, and that the only decent thing he ever did was lift his foot off the gas. He keeps the old canvas jacket, the one he wrapped her in, hanging by the back door, stained and torn and never washed, because he says it still smells like that night, like rain and mud and the exact moment his life split into before and after. And on rainy nights, when the water comes down soft and steady and the whole world goes quiet under it, he says Rain will come and find him wherever he is in the house and press her head against his leg and stay there. The 2 of them just listening to the rain. 2 survivors who found each other in the dark. And he'll rest his hand on her head and think about the 2 small pairs of eyes shining out of a culvert, and about how close he came to never knowing, and about the astonishing truth that the most broken creature he ever met, half dead in a ditch with every reason in the world to quit, had used her last strength not to save herself, but to lead a stranger back to love. So if you take one thing from Ray and Rain tonight, let it be this. Sometimes the shape on the side of the road that everyone else drives past is not a burden or a problem or somebody else's job. Sometimes it is the head lifting in the dark, the thing that has been waiting all its life for one person to finally stop. And you never know, until you pull over and step out into the rain, whether the life you save is going to be theirs, or, in some quiet way you could never have predicted, your own. Ray will tell you it was his. He will tell you a dying dog on a highway gave him back a life he had stopped believing he deserved. And then, when she was strong enough, showed him what real love actually looks like, which is not being rescued, but turning around and rescuing someone else. That is what she did next. That is the thing that left him in tears, and leaves him in tears still. Every rainy night, hand on her head, both of them home at last. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end of Ray and Rain's story, because stories like this one only find the people who need them when you share them. So if this moved you even a little, leave a comment telling me about the animal that changed your life, and I will read every single one.